And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. This is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Friday, March 21st, 2025. And as usual, we start out with the state of the sea ice. Ice is extensive throughout the central northern Bering Sea, and even the edge has and will likely drift a little bit southward, just given a general northerly component to the wind here through the course of the early weekend. We've seen a little bit of ice try to redevelop in areas of Bristol Bay as it has turned colder. We have air temperatures that are going to be down even a little bit below zero along the YK deltas here this weekend, so that will allow perhaps a little bit more of ice development along the edge there. And again, with those northerly winds, there could be a little bit of a southward drift. There are not really any real strong weather systems in the west, nor really coming up out of the North Pacific into the Gulf, but the preferred storm track or low pressure track will be for some of these weaker lows to eventually move up into the Gulf. You get some rotating moisture and energy pivoting back toward the north and west. So again, areas of the Panhandle, it stays unstable. You get rain or snow showers or a mix. And with this time of year, with the stronger surface heating and instability that can be generated, the precipitation tends to be a more showery in nature. We have this stalled out more or less weak front or trough. It's dividing much colder air along the west side of the state, especially over the Chukchi Sea, Eastern Bering, and Bering Strait. By Saturday afternoon, this boundary does not really move at all. It just sits there, and there'll be some periods of light to moderate snow along this trough from especially Kotzebue Sound and the east side of Norton Sound down into the Yukon Valley and middle portion of the Kuskokwim. As we look along the Gulf Coast, here comes a couple of lows just pivoting back toward the north and northwest, with this front will be lifting northward and across the Panhandle as we get into Sunday. So that's going to bring another renewed round of rain and snow, with snow being mainly in the upper elevations, or at least in the northern colder areas of the Panhandle. And then back here to the west, we still have band of light to moderate snow all the way from along the Lisburn Peninsula all the way down into areas of the Yukon and Kuskokwim basins. And then out to the west, there is a low pressure coming in from off the Kamchatka coast. It'll spread a little stronger winds in front into the western Aleutians here by Sunday. So the marine forecast for the southeast Panhandle: inner channels winds will be south-southeast, 10 to 15 knots, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage waves 2, maybe 3 feet. 4 or 5 foot waves here, Dixon Entrance, with southerly winds to 25 knots. South of Sitka, south winds to 25 knots. Waves up to 10 feet there off of Craig and south of Sitka. As we ride north, winds become easterly out of the icy strait out of Yakutat Bay, Cape Suckling, 20 to 25 knots. Waves generally running up to 8 feet there. For Sunday, we find for the inner channels, north winds 15 knots there, Lynn Canal, waves 2 to 3 feet. Southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, Stevens Passage down to Dixon Entrance. Waves a few feet there in Stevens Passage, 6 to maybe 8 feet, Dixon Entrance. Now for areas south of Sitka, south winds 20-25 knots, waves 8 to 10 feet. Sitka, easterly winds to 25 knots. We have 35 knot easterly winds out of the icy strait, and then northeast winds out of Yakutat Bay, Cape Suckling to 15 knots, with waves running 9 to 11 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, within Prince William Sound and outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, east winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 feet within Prince William Sound, 6-7 feet outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. As we drop down through Cook Inlet, northeast to east winds 15 to 20 knots, with waves 3 to 4 feet upper Cook Inlet, maybe 5 to 6 feet lower Cook Inlet outside of the Homer Spit. And then for Sunday, winds will be northeasterly 15 knots within Prince William Sound, 3 foot waves. East winds to 20 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, waves 5-6 feet. And then dropping down again through Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 20 to 25 knots, with waves running 5-6 feet there off of Anchor Point and outside of the Homer Spit. And then for Kodiak Island, Saturday, easterly winds 15 to 20 knots. As we drop down along the peninsula, look for northeast winds to turn more northerly and increase to 25 knots either side there, Cold Bay and False Pass. Waves 4 to as much as 6-7 feet on the North Pacific side, 3 to 6 feet on the Bering side, highest there north of Cold Bay. And then on Sunday, winds are going to become northwesterly from Kodiak Island, and especially across the Alaska Peninsula, increasing to 30 knots mid-peninsula, and especially off of False Pass, north winds to 35 knots with waves 5-6 feet on the North Pacific side, building as high as 7 to 11 and 12 feet on the Bering side. And then for the eastern Aleutians, north winds 30 knots on Saturday, tapering off to 25 and 20 knots once you get west of Atka to Adak, and then variable way out there at Shimmy at just 10 knots. But by Sunday, with that approaching front coming from the low working up along the Kamchatka coast, we have 45-knot gales, Kiska to Shimmy from the south, southerly gales of 35 knots between Adak and Kiska, and then still back here through the central eastern Aleutians, especially east of Adak through on Alaska, generally northwest winds as high as 30 knots vicinity of Nikolsky and on Alaska. For the southwest coast, relatively quiet, variable winds 10 knots within Bristol Bay on Saturday. North winds, though, to 25 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay and along the Pribilovs. And there could be some southward ice drift with these northerly component to the wind, north-northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, Norton Sound down along the lower Yukon Delta. And then for Sunday, across the region, generally northwest winds 25 to 30 knots from Norton Sound down along the lower Yukon Delta, and then 30-knot northwesterly winds there out of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. And as we get to the west, further west, northwest to north winds 20 to 25 knots from St. Matthew down into the Pribilovs. For Saturday across the Bering Strait, winds will be generally out of the north-northwest around 20 knots. As we go up through the Chukchi Sea, winds fall off a bit around the Lisburn Peninsula and up toward off of Wainwright, just 10 to 15 knots. Stronger winds along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, on over to Kaktovik. Look for easterly winds of 25 to 30 knots with the potential for some lighter blowing snow along that area. And then on Sunday, generally east winds 20 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast to off of Wainwright from Kaktovik to Wainwright. As we get down through the Chukchi Sea, winds turn north and then northwesterly 15 to 20 knots into Kotzebue Sound. And as we drop through the Bering Strait, look for generally northwest to west winds at 20 knots, and especially there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island for Sunday.